During this time of Advent, of hope and anticipation, I have been considering our North Star. Our North Star, or Pole Star, aka Polaris, is famous for holding nearly still in our sky while the entire northern sky revolves and moves around it. That's because it's located nearly at the North Celestial Pole, the point around which the entire northern sky turns. Polaris marks the way due north. I don't know if I'm pointing north. I'll just point up. In our lexicon, this is a metaphor, this North Star is a metaphor for certainty, for orientation to something sure and eternal. Oh my gosh. Well, okay, thank you. Yeah. Takes a village to raise a minister, I guess, too. Thank you. So in our lexicon, this is known as a metaphor for certainty, for orientation to something sure and eternal. And when enslaved people in this country escaped to freedom, it was the North Star they followed. But as it turns out, friends, not even the North Star is forever. Right now, we see Polaris, but humans 5,000 years ago knew another star called Thuban as their North Star. And 13 years from now, yet another star named Vega will be the North Star for Earth. Polaris will take another turn in about 26,000 years, if any of you are around for that. Nothing is certain, not faith nor doubt. I used to think that in order to proudly let my faith flag fly as a Unitarian Universalist, I used to think I required certainty. And I remember the first time I ever saw a girl with a Chalice tattoo. I was a sophomore in college, and as soon as she rolled up her sleeves and I saw it, I felt immediate alienation from my faith. I mean, I thought I was pretty UU, but clearly she was really UU. She had stamped her body with the chalice for everyone to see forever. I asked her why she did it. Oh, she said, I'm like a really religious UU. And it was true. Even during college, she attended UU Campus Fellowship each week. And unlike most of us in those formative years, her ethical stance on most issues was fixed. She was a vegan, a member of the peer sex education team, a leader of the feminist group on campus. In her spare time, she tutored at nearby after-school programs. She made food and dropped it off to people living on the street. She was on student government. And as I recall, I don't think she drank alcohol or even smoked pot. Not only that, but she was an English major. Unitarian Universalist, bona fide. I was also an English major. I have never forgotten that moment. That moment when I realized I was a UU, but I wasn't a really religious UU. I mean, I had a few t-shirts from mountain camp, but I was experimenting with Quakerism at that time and attending Quaker meeting. Otherwise, I just didn't think too much about my life choices, not ethics nor virtue. At that point, Unitarian Universalism was still my Sunday school religion. I was a fierce UU in high school, but once I got to college, the truth is, I just hadn't thought about it much. When I saw her tattoo, I envied her calm certainty, that clarity. I've seen this a few other times in my life, this type of expressive certainty about Unitarian Universalism. Mostly, I've seen it amongst a network of Unitarian Universalist religious educators when I was one of their colleagues. Andrea Lerner, until recently, was the congregational life consultant of the Central East region of the United States in our denomination. And quite a few years ago, she developed a hashtag called Chalice of the Day. At first, it was only she finding chalices in her oatmeal or in a cloud formation. But today, UU ministers, religious educators, and lay people find them and send them to her. There are hundreds, if not more, if not thousands of us, seeking a hidden image in our daily lives, a sign that we are on the right path, or a miracle in the toast, proclaiming our faith and our presence in the world. Andrea's Twitter handle, Relentlessly UU, has been a beacon of joy and collective innovation. Now she's got all of us out there looking for chalices in our lives, sharing her posts, and there's a lightness to the project that feels like a balm amidst the heaviness in our denomination and in at least my online existence. Now, I am lucky in my life that in addition to Andrea Lerner's Chalice of the Day project, I also had the opportunity to serve after one of our most, I would say, evangelical ministers. I served one of our largest, most vibrant urban UU congregations in the wake of the death of their longtime senior minister, Forest Church. He is most likely one of our most well-known ministers. He was interviewed by Terry Gross on Fresh Air not long before he died in 2008. And he is also one of the few Unitarian Universalist ministers who was most effective in sharing the gospel of theological inclusion. In 1990, Reverend Forrest Church, senior minister of All Souls, New York, took out ads in all the buses and subways and even a couple billboards around the city. Only a few congregants supported his effort at the time. He did this without the large-scale support from the congregation, as I understand it. The ads on all the buses and subways at that time that he bought were read, "AIDS is a human disease and requires a human response." The poster showed two people hugging, implying one of them was HIV positive or living with AIDS. Now remember, this was 1990, when myths about HIV transmission were rampant and many people living with AIDS, especially in New York, were socially quarantined. And at the bottom of these ads was the address for All Souls Unitarian Universalist Church. For the next decade, All Souls attracted religious wanderers who could accommodate rational thoughts about the AIDS scare in New York, and so they found their way into the church. Not only that, but in the late 1980s and for part of the 90s, Reverend Forrest Church had a radio program on a local public classical station on Sunday evenings. And during this period of time, because in large part both of the subway ads and the radio show, membership at All Souls, which began at about 350 people at the time of his arrival in '86, grew to over 1,000 members by the late 1990s. Reverend Forrest Church was unwaveringly certain about sharing the good news of a faith without certainty. He was unwaveringly certain about sharing the good news of a faith without certainty. Forrest Church wrote to the Universalist, and he, by the way, he really felt that he was more of a Universalist Unitarian. To the Universalist, truth in religion is like truth in poetry, he wrote. Our common text is the creation. Though limited by the depth and field of our vision, we are driven to make sense of it as best we can. So we tell stories, formulate hypotheses, develop schools of thought and worship, and pass our partial wisdom down from generation to generation. Not only every religion, but every philosophy, ideology, and scientific worldview is a critical school with creation as its text. Universalism accounts for the fact that we all suffer. We are broken. We are in need of healing. We struggle to accept ourselves and forgive others. Aware of our imperfections, we seek a more perfect faith, more perfect hope, more perfect love, more perfect justice. At best, we empathize with one another's pain and rise together in answer to a higher law. Illumination shines from heart to heart. We discover the healing and saving power of the holy within the ordinary. For instance, anyone who embraces the most familiar universalist definition that God is love discovers God's nature in their own experience of love. This may not mean that God is love, actually, but it certainly suggests that love is divine. Forrest Church wrote those words. Now, the North Star we Unitarian Universalists have to offer is like the one in the night sky, impermanent, and often not the brightest star in the sky. Polaris is the 50th brightest star in our sky. And on certain dark nights, it can be difficult to find. It requires much of us sometimes. Sometimes it requires the compass of a fellow traveler on the journey. And about this chalice, how did the chalice come to be so central to our faith anyway? The philosopher Alfred North Whitehead said that real symbols have the power to change history. Now, some of you may know the story of the flaming chalice, that during the Second World War, an American Unitarian, Reverend Charles Joy, was stationed in Lisbon, Portugal, to help refugees from Nazism escape to safe havens. As the executive director of the Unitarian Service Committee, Joy felt this new unknown organization needed some visual image to represent Unitarianism to the world, especially when dealing with government agencies. Joy worked with people from all walks of life, was especially interested in helping artists, intellectuals, and dissidents flee from Nazi parts of Europe. Many of the refugees fled without the identification papers that they needed to cross borders. And so the Lisbon office concentrated especially on helping them obtain replacement papers. Charles Joy introduced an innovation: travel documents issued by the Unitarian Service Committee itself. Now, this may amuse you a bit, he wrote to the Boston office of the USC, to know that we are now issuing Navicerts to pass immigrants to the New World through the British blockade. We are certifying that they are politically safe and sound. So the Unitarian Service Committee created these documents that people needed to travel across the borders. And Joy believed these documents needed a seal to be official. He asked Hans Deutsch, an Austrian refugee artist working in Lisbon, to create one. The result was essentially the flaming chalice as we know it now. Joy described what Deutsch had drawn in the following terms: a chalice with a flame, the kind of chalice which the Greeks and Romans put on their altars, the holy oil burning in it, a symbol of helpfulness and sacrifice. This was in the mind of the artist. Unitarian Universalist minister Kali Fire writes, the American Unitarians and Universalists merged in the early 60s. Versions of this symbol were adopted by the Unitarian Universalist Association and by the General Assembly of Unitarian and Free Churches in Britain and around the world. Unitarianism values insights from the present as well as from the past. So it is appropriate that flaming chalice symbols should have both ancient and modern roots, in both instances grounded in the principles of sacrifice and service to humanity. The symbol of the chalice flame may be further understood as a metaphor for the lives of human beings, both as individuals and in community. A cup is a familiar object made to be held and passed around for sharing. A flame, by contrast, is not an object at all. It cannot be weighed or measured. It is no static object. It is a dynamic, changing process. even in this moment. Do you see it? The flame requires 3 elements. The first of these is fuel. Fuel is material, like the human body, like the building, the books, the money, and the documents of a church community. If a fire lacks fuel, it is said to be burning low, like a candle in its final moments. Now, Unitarians are not necessarily aesthetic or otherworldly, but try to take a realistic and rational view of life. Unitarians readily accept that, like kindling for a fire, people in their private lives and collectively need fuel, need energy, need things, even physical things, to get them through. And the second element is heat. Think of the heat of life itself, distinguishing the living from the dead, the spark of intelligence and passion, the warmth of human encounter, even the friction of disagreement. If a fire lacks heat, as when you dampen a flame with water, it is said to be guttering. And to develop as people, well, we also need heat. The vitality of congregational life, activities which animate and engross, thought-provoking moments that challenge. Well, these are all the signs of a healthy, liberal religious community. Unitarians believe that we are sustained by the warmth that functioning and supportive communities can provide for us. The third element is air. Spirit has always been compared with air or wind by Greeks and Hebrews alike. If a fire lacks air, we say that it is smoldering. There is much heat, but little or no light. And our life is too often like this. Now, Unitarian Universalists are open to the importance of a personal religious experience, whether it be in worship on a Sunday or up on a mountaintop or in everyday moments throughout your life. To develop, people need air. People need spirit, connection, inspiration. They need breath. Something invisible yet vital element, breath. Or deep moments of the self in prayer or meditation. Or the shared moment of the heart when spirit is felt. Now, Unitarian Universalists, unlike Moses, do not simply find the fire burning in the wilderness. The flaming chalice is no burning bush, but it is something to be lit and relit by every person. It requires an act of will, of purpose, and of faith. Unitarian Universalism allows people to develop freely without the constrictions of received dogma, while experiencing the warmth of community. Unitarians are open to the truths that science has bequeathed, including the truth that darkness has no existence in itself. Darkness is the absence of light. And Unitarian Universalists believe the way to overcome the darkness is to light our lamps whenever we meet. This is a story of the chalice, but it is only one story. You may have your own story of what this means to you, or how your faith animates you to action in your community, or how it grounds you in your spiritual exploration. In 2020, I hope to hear from more of you in worship. I would like to add a new element of our worship service where we find out how our congregants' faith inspire them to live as a UU, to drive as a UU, oh yes, to parent as a UU, to study epidemiology as a UU, to eat as a UU, all right? Perhaps you'll find a way to show and tell your faith to your wider community outside of here. To say, I am a theological imperfectionist. I don't have a dogma and I don't have answers, but my life is my faith. See, what we lack in orthodoxy, we make up for in orthopraxy. Our living flame. That is to say, our deeds and not our creeds. Our lives are our expression of our faith. Some of us may need reminders of our North Star from time to time when it can be difficult to find. In this event, some Unitarian Universalists have done some creative things to remind them of their North Star. Our UCA member Ted Minersman's twin daughters gave us all permission to discuss their tattoos that remind them of their faith home. So you can see, so now there are many tattoos, but I think Ted said the first one was the chalice with the phoenix rising from it. So many times in my life, I have longed for certainty, for a faith that would just tell me what to believe. Life is complicated and hard, and I have longed for sympathy. Sorry, that too. But I've also longed for simplicity. Imperfection, right in front of you. Certainty. These days, I find so much more power, meaning, and surrender in the mystery. No need of certainty. Okay, so I know it's not a chalice, but it is the phoenix in front of a labyrinth, which I believe is also inspired by UCA. About a month ago, I was talking to a colleague somewhere in another state, not in Atlanta. I was talking to a colleague about this sermon. She is a newly minted UU minister, a young woman whose call to ministry is powerful, though she is currently on hiatus from her ability to fulfill that call due to some really significant health challenges. She perked up when I mentioned chalice tattoos. "Oh, I love mine. It's a little different than your run-of-the-mill chalice, though," she said. A friend of mine had seen it somewhere. I don't know where they saw it, and she designed this beautiful chalice that has come to mean so much to me, especially with all of my surgeries and my illness. Would you like to see it? Sure, I replied, feeling less impressed by chalice tattoos since that first one I saw in college. You recognize that? That's our logo. Now, she didn't know this was our logo. Holy synchronicity, I call this. Our phoenix, rising from the flame of our chalice, is the guiding beacon for people beyond this community, people who we have never met. Now we find ourselves in the darkest time of year when the night is long, looking up as in the nativity story for a North Star we can rely on. Will he, won't he be impeached? Will we as a nation ever recover from the legacies of slavery that sowed the seeds of the inhumane response at our borders? Will our vote matter? Will we get all the shopping done in time? Will Santa arrive even if we've been a little naughty? Will our family members create harmony or dissonance at holiday events? Will the oil last for 8 nights? The answers are uncertain. Even our North Star is not eternal. May we seek and may we find creative ways to embrace the mystery and share it, to be the light for others who need it. So complex in its luminescence, even if we are hurt, may we reach out and find the light of another. And may we find ways to express whatever this chalice means to you, but express it with pride. Put it out there creatively. Maybe not a tattoo, maybe just a bumper sticker, but even that. And allow it to light the path for all of us, step by step as we go, facing uncertainty together. May it be so. Amen.